Go ahead, laugh, Daniel Hayes said, his voice calm but carrying farther than anyone expected. It's not the first time a man like me has been the punchline. And the room did exactly that. Sharp laughter bouncing off polished marble floors and glass walls 40 stories above downtown Chicago, where people in tailored suits held crystal glasses and measured worth in millions, not moments, not character. Someone muttered, "Know your place." Another smirked into his drink, and for a second, Daniel almost let it pass, almost faded back into the quiet role he had mastered, the invisible man who fixed what others broke and asked for nothing in return. But then came the line, soft, almost careless, "Guess I'll just marry the boss then." And the laughter exploded louder, faster, easier, because that was safe, because that made sense. Because a janitor with worn shoes and a 5-year-old daughter waiting at home in a small 2-bedroom apartment didn't belong in a sentence with a billionaire CEO. But Victoria Hale didn't laugh, not even a breath of amusement, not even the polite curve of a social smile. She just watched him, still, precise, her sharp eyes cutting through the noise like a question no one else had thought to ask. And something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle tightening in the air, like the moment before a storm when even the lights seemed to hum a little differently. Daniel noticed. Of course he did, because men who live quietly learn to read what others miss, the way silence can speak louder than applause, the way dignity doesn't need permission. And for a heartbeat, their eyes met across the room, hers steady, controlled, his tired but unshaken. And in that space, something unspoken passed between them, something no one else understood. Then the music picked back up, glasses clinked again, conversations resumed like nothing had happened, but the laughter didn't land the same. Not quite, not anymore, because somewhere between a joke and a truth, a line had been crossed, and no one could explain why the most powerful woman in the room had just looked at the least powerful man like he had said something real. By the time the gala lights dimmed and the last round of polite applause faded into the night, Daniel Hayes was already back where he belonged, or at least where everyone believed he did, in the quiet service hallway behind the ballroom, where the air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and warm metal vents, and the echoes of laughter could not quite reach him anymore. He rolled his cart slowly, steady hands, steady breath, like a man who had learned long ago that dignity did not live in where you stood, but in how you stood there. And as he wiped down the last stainless steel panel, his mind was not on the room upstairs or the people who had laughed. It was on a small apartment 10 miles away, on a little girl who would be asleep by now with a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon glowing beside her bed, waiting for him to come home. "You always come back, right, Daddy?" she had asked that morning, her voice soft, her world small and certain, and he had smiled the way fathers do when they make promises they intend to keep. "Always," he had said, not loud, not dramatic, just true. A pair of employees passed by the hallway entrance, their voices low but careless. "Can you believe that guy earlier?" One said, "Marry the boss?" "That was embarrassing," the other chuckled. Some people forget their place, and Daniel did not look up, did not respond, just kept moving the cloth in slow, even strokes, because silence, for him, was not weakness, it was discipline, it was control, it was the quiet strength of a man who knew exactly who he was without needing anyone else to confirm it. Upstairs, in an office wrapped in glass and city light, Victoria Hale stood alone, her heels set neatly beside her desk, her posture no longer the rigid armor she wore in public, but something more human, more still. She replayed the moment not as a joke, but as a question, the way his voice had not risen, the way his eyes had not asked for approval, the way the room had laughed, and he had not needed to defend himself, and that unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. She reached for her phone, paused, then set it back down. Control had always been her language, precision her shield, but this was something else, something quieter, something that did not respond to power the way she expected. "Find Daniel Hayes," she said finally to her assistant over the intercom, her tone measured, but different, softer by a fraction that most people would never notice. "I want to speak with him tomorrow morning." There was a brief silence on the other end, just long enough to register surprise. "Yes, Ms. Hale," came the reply, and as the line clicked off, Victoria looked out over the city, thousands of lights stretching for miles, each one a story, each one a life, and for the first time in a long time, the one she could not quite understand belonged to the quiet man who had said something that sounded like a joke, but felt like the truth. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Just a pale Chicago sunrise stretching between glass towers as Daniel Hayes stepped off the bus, his worn boots touching pavement still cool from the night. And for a moment he stood there, shoulders squared, breathing in the quiet before the city fully woke, because mornings like this were the only time the world felt level, before titles and money and expectations tilted everything out of balance. Inside the building, the lobby hummed with its usual rhythm, polished floors reflecting hurried footsteps, security gates blinking green and red, people moving with purpose that always seemed to cost more than his entire paycheck. And Daniel moved through it all the same way he always did, unnoticed, unbothered, steady, until the front desk attendant looked up, hesitated, and said his name with a tone that did not quite belong. "Mr. Hayes, you have been asked to report to the executive floor." A pause followed, small but heavy. "Ms. Hale is expecting you." 3 nearby employees glanced over, then quickly looked away, the air tightening just enough to feel it. "You serious?" One whispered under his breath. "The janitor?" Another murmured, but Daniel did not respond. He simply nodded once, quiet, controlled, and stepped toward the elevators that most people in his position never used, the ones lined with brushed steel and silent doors that opened only for those who belonged. And as he stepped inside, alone, the reflection staring back at him was not impressive by their standards. No tailored suit, no polished watch, just a man in a clean uniform, eyes steady, carrying something they could not measure. The elevator rose floor by floor, each soft chime marking distance not just in height, but in expectation, and somewhere between the 20th and the 40th. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, not out of fear, but out of focus, the way a man does when he reminds himself of what matters. A little girl finishing her cereal at a small kitchen table, swinging her feet because they did not quite reach the floor, trusting him to come back the same man every night. Not bigger, not richer, just present. When the doors opened, the world changed, quieter, softer, carpets replacing marble, voices lowering into controlled tones, and beyond a set of glass doors stood the office that defined power in that building. Victoria Hale's space, where decisions shaped lives without ever raising a voice. And inside, she was already waiting, standing by the window, the city stretched out behind her like something she owned but did not need to touch, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. And as Daniel stepped in, the assistant closed the door behind him with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. "You came," she said, not surprised, not warm, just precise. And Daniel gave a small nod. "You asked," he replied, simple, direct, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke, the silence settling not as discomfort, but as something deliberate, something that neither rushed to fill, because both of them understood in very different ways that what was about to be said did not belong to the noise of the outside world. And then she turned fully toward him, eyes steady, voice lower now. "Yesterday you said something," a pause, measured, controlled. "And I need to know." Another pause, sharper this time. "Did you mean it?" And the room, for reasons neither of them would explain yet, seemed to hold its breath. Daniel did not answer right away, not because he did not know, but because he understood that some words, once spoken clearly, could not be taken back. And in a room like this, where every sentence could move markets or end careers, silence was often the most honest place to begin. Victoria watched him closely, not with impatience, but with a kind of focus that stripped away pretense, as if she had spent her entire life listening to people say what they thought she wanted to hear and had grown tired of it. "It sounded like a joke," she continued, her voice even, controlled. "But you did not laugh." Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. "That is because I was not trying to be funny." 3 short sentences, simple, clean, and they landed heavier than anything said the night before. Victoria's expression shifted, just slightly, not softer, not yet, but less certain, and she took a step closer, heels quiet against the carpet. "Then what were you trying to be?" she asked, and for a moment, the distance between them was not measured in feet or titles, but in the weight of two completely Different lives standing in the same space. Daniel glanced toward the window, the city stretching out in glass and steel, then back to her. Honest, he said, and the word did not come out proud or dramatic, just grounded, like something he had carried for a long time without needing to explain it. The air settled into a slower rhythm, the kind that forces people to listen whether they want to or not, and Victoria crossed her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. You do realize what you said, she pressed. You were standing in a room full of executives, investors, people who have spent decades building what you see out there. She gestured slightly to the skyline. And you decided to make yourself the center of a joke that included me. Daniel shook his head once, calm, respectful. No, ma'am, he said. I did not make myself the center of anything. A pause, brief but deliberate. They did that when they laughed. The sentence landed differently this time. Not sharp, not confrontational, just clear, and for the first time since the conversation began, Victoria did not immediately respond. Instead, she studied him, really studied him, the way she might evaluate a deal that did not follow any familiar pattern. Because this man standing in front of her was not asking for anything, not money, not approval, not opportunity, and that absence of need unsettled her more than ambition ever could. Why would you say something like that? She asked finally, her voice quieter now, less guarded, and Daniel hesitated, not out of fear, but because the answer was not something most people in her world would understand. Because where I come from, he said slowly, you do not say things you would not stand behind. He met her eyes again, steady, unflinching. Even if the room decides to laugh. 2 seconds passed, maybe 3, and something in Victoria's posture shifted again, not visibly to anyone else, but enough that she felt it herself, a small fracture in the certainty she had built over years of control, because the man in front of her had just offered something she could not buy, could not negotiate, could not command, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not have the advantage. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full, heavy with the realization that whatever this conversation was, it had already moved beyond a joke, and neither of them could return to where it started. Victoria did not move for a moment, not because she lacked an answer, but because for the first time in years, none of her usual ones seemed to apply, and that unsettled her more than any failed negotiation or lost deal ever had. You speak like you have nothing to lose, she said finally, her tone measured, but no longer as sharp, and Daniel gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. No, ma'am, he replied. I speak like I already know what matters. 3 short sentences, calm, grounded, and they did not challenge her authority, but they did something far more dangerous. They made her question it. She turned slightly, pacing once toward her desk, then back again, a controlled motion, the kind she used when recalculating, when something did not fit into the structure she had built her life on. People in your position usually ask for something, she said, her eyes narrowing just enough to reveal curiosity beneath control. A promotion, a favor, recognition, a brief pause. You asked for none of that. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. That is because I did not come here for that, he said, and his voice did not rise, did not push. It simply remained steady, like a line drawn in place long before this conversation began. The city outside continued its quiet hum, cars moving like distant signals, sunlight climbing higher against the glass. But inside the room, time felt slower, heavier, shaped by the absence of expectation. Then why are you here? Victoria asked, softer now, and this time, Daniel took a breath before answering. Not long, just enough to choose honesty over simplicity. Because you asked me to be, he said, and the words, plain as they were, carried something she had not heard directed at her in a very long time. Not compliance, not fear, not ambition, but respect without submission. Her posture shifted again, almost invisible, but real, the kind of shift that happens when control meets something it cannot dominate. And for a second, she looked at him not as an employee, not as a problem to solve, but as a man whose life existed entirely outside her reach. Do you always answer like that? She asked, a faint trace of something new in her voice. Something that might have been curiosity, and Daniel allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Not playful, not arrogant, just human. Only when the question matters, he said. The silence that followed was different now, less tense, more deliberate, as if both of them were standing at the edge of something neither had planned for. And Victoria walked back toward the window, her reflection faint against the skyline. "You have a daughter," she said, not a question, and Daniel nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "How old?" she asked, still not turning around. "5," he answered, and there was a subtle change in his voice this time. Something softer, something warmer, the kind that does not belong in boardrooms or negotiations. Victoria absorbed that quietly, her fingers resting lightly against the glass. "And everything you do," she continued, "is for her." Daniel did not hesitate. "Everything," he said, and that single word carried more weight than any resume or title ever could. Another pause settled between them, longer now, but not empty, filled with the quiet recognition of two completely different worlds intersecting for reasons neither of them fully understood. And then Victoria turned back, her expression no longer guarded in the same way, still controlled, but less certain. "Yesterday," she said slowly, "when you said those words," a brief pause, her eyes holding his, "you did not ask for a future." Another pause, sharper now. "You stated one." Daniel did not respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was as steady as before. "No, ma'am," he said. "I only spoke what I would be willing to stand behind." And for the first time in that room, Victoria Hale, a woman who had built her life on certainty, realized she was standing in front of something she could not predict, and that realization did not make her feel powerful, it made her feel quiet. Victoria remained still for a moment longer, her gaze steady but no longer guarded in the same way, as if something inside her had shifted just enough to let a different kind of question through, one she had not allowed herself to ask in years. "What did you give up?" she said quietly, and this time it was not a challenge, not a test, but something closer to understanding, and Daniel did not answer immediately. Not because he was hiding anything, but because the truth was not something he carried lightly. He looked down briefly, then back at her, his expression unchanged but deeper somehow. "Everything that did not matter as much as she did," he said, and the simplicity of the words made them heavier, not lighter. Victoria frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in calculation. "That is not how most people describe sacrifice," she replied, and Daniel gave a small, almost reflective nod. "That is because most people think sacrifice means losing something," he said. "I think it means choosing something." 3 sentences, measured, steady, and they landed with the kind of weight that could not be argued with. The room grew quieter, the kind of quiet that does not come from absence, but from presence, from something real settling into place where noise used to be. Victoria stepped closer again, not out of control, but out of focus, as if she needed to see him more clearly. "You had other options," she said. "Better jobs, more money, a different life." And Daniel did not deny it, did not dramatize it. "Yes, ma'am," he answered simply. "But those options came with a cost I was not willing to pay." She held his gaze, searching for hesitation, for regret, for anything that would make him easier to understand, but found none. "And you never looked back?" she asked, softer now, and Daniel paused, just briefly, then shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "I look forward." And that answer, quiet as it was, carried something she had not expected, not defiance, not pride, but peace. Outside the window, the city continued to move, unaware, indifferent, but inside the room, something had slowed, something had shifted into a different rhythm, one that did not follow power or position. Victoria turned slightly, her hand resting on the edge of her desk now, grounding herself in something familiar. "Do you know what people would say if they heard this conversation?" she asked, and Daniel allowed the faintest trace of a smile. "Probably the same thing they said last night," he replied, and she almost smiled in return. Almost, but stopped herself, not out of coldness, but out of habit. "And that does not bother you?" she pressed. One last test, one last measure, and Daniel met her eyes without hesitation. "No, ma'am," he said, "because they are not the ones I have to answer to." A pause followed, longer. This time, and for the first time, Victoria did not fill it, did not control it. She simply stood there, absorbing the weight of a man who lived by something she could not negotiate with. Then, slowly, she straightened, her posture returning, but not entirely the same. "You are different," she said, not as a compliment, not as a judgment, but as a realization, and Daniel did not react, did not claim it. "I am consistent," he replied, and that single word, calm and unshaken, settled into the room like truth, leaving behind a silence that neither of them rushed to break. Victoria did not speak again right away, and that in itself was unusual, because in every room she entered, silence was something she controlled, something she directed, something that bent around her decisions. But now it lingered on its own terms, shaped by a man who had not raised his voice, had not asked for anything, and yet had shifted the ground beneath her without trying. She walked slowly back to her desk, fingertips brushing against the smooth surface as if reconnecting with something familiar, something measurable, but even that felt different now, less certain, less complete. "Do you ever think about what your life could have been?" she asked, her voice quieter than before, not testing him, but almost testing herself, and Daniel considered the question for a moment, not dismissing it, not rushing it. "No, ma'am," he said, "because I know what it is." 3 sentences, simple, direct, and they left no room for regret. Victoria looked at him, really looked this time, not at his position, not at his clothes, but at the steadiness in his posture, the absence of tension in his shoulders, the way he stood as if he had already made peace with every choice that had brought him here, and something inside her tightened, not in resistance, but in recognition of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. "Peace," she said softly, almost to herself, and Daniel did not answer, because he did not need to, because some words are not meant to be confirmed, only understood. She exhaled slowly, turning her gaze back toward the city, but it did not look the same now. The buildings still stood, the traffic still moved, the world still operated on the same rules, but something about it felt distant, like a system she had mastered but never truly belonged to. "Most people in my world," she continued, her voice steady but no longer distant, "spend their entire lives trying to reach a point where they can choose what matters." A pause followed, brief but heavy. "You started there." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, ma'am," he said. "I learned it the hard way." And there was no bitterness in his voice, no trace of complaint, just truth. Victoria turned back toward him, her expression softer. Now, not in weakness, but in clarity. "And you would not change it?" she asked, and Daniel met her eyes without hesitation. "No, ma'am," he replied, "because then I would not be the man my daughter knows." The words settled into the room with a weight that did not need explanation, and for the first time, Victoria felt something she could not control, not fear, not doubt, but something quieter, something deeper. The realization that everything she had built, every deal, every victory, every carefully calculated move, had never given her what this man carried so naturally. She took a slow breath, her posture straightening again. But this time it was not armor, it was decision, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm, but different. "Daniel," she said, using his name fully for the first time, not as a title, not as a position, but as a person, "I do not believe in accidents." A pause, steady, deliberate. "And I do not believe you spoke those words by mistake." The air shifted. Again, subtle but undeniable, and for the first time since he entered the room, Daniel felt the direction of the conversation change, not toward judgment, not toward dismissal, but toward something neither of them had planned for, something that could not be undone, and something that, once spoken, would not be taken lightly. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned slightly toward her desk, her movements slower now, more deliberate, as if each step carried weight she could not ignore, and when she reached for the intercom, her hand paused just above it, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness that what she was about to do would not fit into any pattern she had followed before. "Stay," she said quietly, not a command, not quite a request, and Daniel did not move, not because he was told to, but because he understood that something real was unfolding, something that required stillness rather than reaction. She pressed the button, her voice returning to its usual clarity, but beneath it, something had changed. "Clear my next 30 minutes, she said, and on the other end, there was a brief pause, just long enough to register surprise. "Yes, Ms. Hale," came the response. She released the button and turned back to him. The room settling into a deeper silence, the kind that does not belong to business, but to decisions that cannot be undone. "You said you stand behind your words," she began, her tone even, but her eyes searching now, not for weakness, but for truth. "I need to know if that includes what comes after them." Daniel did not answer immediately, not because he doubted himself, but because he understood the weight behind what she was asking, and when he spoke, his voice remained steady, unchanged. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It always has." 3 words, simple, grounded, and they did not rise to meet her world. They held their own. Victoria took a slow breath, her shoulders straightening, not as armor, but as decision, and for the first time since he entered the room, she stepped fully out from behind her desk, closing the distance between them until there was no barrier left but the truth itself. "Then listen carefully," she said, her voice lower now, quieter, but carrying more than it had before. "Because I do not say things twice." A brief pause followed, the kind that marks the edge of something irreversible. "Yesterday, you spoke without calculation." Another pause, her eyes locked onto his. "And today, I am going to do the same." The air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, as if the room itself understood that what came next would not belong to logic or expectation. Daniel remained still, not tense, not uncertain, just present, the way he had been from the beginning, and that steadiness, more than anything, gave her the space to continue. "You said you would stand behind your words," she repeated, softer now. "So I will stand behind mine." A breath, controlled but deeper than before. "What you said yesterday." Another pause, longer this time. "I am not dismissing it." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, and for a fraction of a second, even the distant hum of the city seemed to fade. Daniel's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened, not with surprise, but with understanding, because this was no longer about a moment, it was about meaning. Victoria held that silence, did not rush it, did not fill it, because for once, she did not need to control the outcome. She only needed to speak the truth she had been avoiding, and when she finally did, her voice was steady, but different. "If you meant what you said," she continued, "then I need you to understand what that means in my world." Her gaze did not waver. "Because in my world, words like that are not jokes." Another pause, deliberate, final. "They are decisions." And the room, for the first time since the conversation began, felt like it was standing on the edge of something that could not be taken back, something that would change not just how they saw each other, but how everyone else would see them, and neither of them stepped away. Daniel did not step back, did not shift his weight, did not look away, and that stillness, that quiet refusal to retreat, answered more than any words could have, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because the truth had already arrived before either of them decided what to do with it. Victoria studied him one last time, not as a CEO measuring risk, not as a woman testing control, but as someone standing at the edge of a choice she could not delegate, could not delay, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the distance it once had. "Then I will answer you," she said, and the words did not echo. They settled, firm and deliberate. Daniel's gaze remained steady, not expectant, not hopeful, just present, because he had not come for an outcome, he had come with truth, and whatever followed would not change that. "If a man says something like that in my world," she continued, slower now, choosing each word with care, "he is either careless or certain." A brief pause, her eyes holding his. "And you are not careless." The air shifted again, not sharply, but deeply, like something aligning that had been out of place for a long time. She took one step closer, closing the last distance between power and presence, and for the first time, there was no hierarchy in the space between them, only two people standing in the same moment. "So here is my answer," she said, and this time, she did not hesitate, did not measure, did not calculate. "I do not laugh at things that matter." A pause followed, softer now, but heavier than anything before, "and I do not ignore them either." Daniel's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes settled, not surprise, not victory, but recognition. Victoria exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that does not release tension, but accepts it. You asked a question yesterday, she said, her voice steady. Even if you did not intend it to be one. Another pause, deliberate, final, and I am not dismissing it. The silence that followed was complete, not empty, but full, the kind that does not need explanation, because everyone who would have laughed was not here, and yet somehow, the weight of that silence felt louder than any room full of voices. Daniel nodded once, small, respectful. Then I will stand by it, he said, and his words did not rise, did not push. They simply existed, grounded in the same quiet certainty he had carried from the beginning. Victoria held his gaze, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not see a position, did not see a difference, did not see something to control. She saw something she could trust, and that realization did not come with excitement. It came with stillness. Outside, the city continued as it always did, fast, loud, and different. But inside that room, something had changed that no one else would fully understand, because it was not about status, not about wealth, not about advantage. It was about a man who spoke with dignity and a woman who finally chose to listen. And in that quiet, undeniable moment, the world did not applaud, did not react. It simply went silent.